I was halfway up my driveway with a U-Haul full of vintage pinball machines, houseplants, and what some might consider an excessive collection of lava lamps when a woman with a clipboard physically stepped in front of my truck. I had to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting her. She tapped on my windshield with her pen, her face twisted into what I can only describe as practiced indignation. "You cannot unload that here," she announced, speaking loud enough for the entire street to hear. "You are not an approved HOA member." I blinked, genuinely confused. "But I own the house," I said through the open window. The woman, whose name tag read Gretchen Paley in unnecessarily large letters, did not move an inch. "Then you should have read the covenant, Mr. Sims. In Birch Hollow Estates, we choose our neighbors." Behind her, 6 women in matching visor hats materialized like they had been summoned by some suburban ritual. Each one clutched a laminated binder against their chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. One of them actually licked her finger and flipped to a tab that I could see was labeled Unapproved Color Palettes. The whole scene felt like a fever dream, except the U-Haul meter was still running at $89 an hour. My name is Trevor Sims, 41 years old, software engineer, and someone who values peace and quiet above most things. I had just purchased a corner lot ranch house in Birch Hollow Estates after the listing promised it was, quote, quiet, neighborly, and community-focused, unquote. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that the neighborhood was under the iron grip of an unofficial but deadly serious HOA run by Gretchen Paley, a retired elementary school principal who treated bylaws like religious scripture and wielded a clipboard with the authority of a medieval sword. All I wanted was to tend my garden, brew kombucha in peace, and generally be left alone to enjoy the house I had paid $420,000 for. Apparently, this made me what Gretchen would later call in a mass email a clear and present danger to community standards. The woman had ruled this neighborhood for 12 years. She did not like threats to her authority. She liked order, compliance, and above all, she liked power. When I had moved in without formally applying for HOA membership, without asking her permission, without kissing the ring, she declared it, and I quote from the newsletter she hand-delivered to every house except mine, a dangerous precedent that could unravel the very fabric of our community. Also, apparently my mailbox was the wrong shade of taupe. Who knew there were multiple shades of taupe? The harassment began almost immediately, starting with small but increasingly unhinged tactics designed to break my spirit. Day 1, I found a notice duct taped to my door that read garbage bins must be hidden by 6:01 p.m. This is your only warning. The bins were in my garage. They had always been in my garage. Day 3, someone made an anonymous tip to animal control that my non-existent rooster was crowing at 3 a.m. The officer who showed up looked embarrassed as he explained the complaint while we both stood in my clearly rooster-free backyard. Day 5, I caught a woman with binoculars literally hiding in my hydrangeas. When I waved at her, she made a sound I can only describe as a hiss and vanished into the bushes like some kind of suburban cryptid. The following week, Gretchen hosted what she called an emergency HOA board meeting on her front porch. She had set up folding chairs, a pitcher of lemonade that no one touched, and an actual projector screen for a PowerPoint presentation titled The Threat Among Us. I know this because my next-door neighbor, Carl, attended out of morbid curiosity and sent me photos. In the presentation, I was never referred to by name. I was simply the outsider, which she pronounced with the kind of venom usually reserved for war criminals. Slide 7 was just a zoomed-in photo of my garden gnome collection with red circles drawn around them like evidence at a crime scene. Then came the fines. $75 for, quote, unregulated front porch furniture, unquote. The furniture in question was a single rocking chair. $120 for, quote, failure to harmonize with community values, unquote. I still do not know what that means. $200 for, quote, aggressive lawn height, unquote. My grass was exactly 2 3/4 inches tall, which I knew because I watched Gretchen measure it herself at 4 a.m. on my security camera. I ignored the fines. They had no legal weight anyway, something I had confirmed with a lawyer friend who laughed for a solid minute when I explained the situation. I also installed more security cameras, which captured increasingly bizarre footage of Gretchen on my property at all hours, sometimes just standing in my yard and taking notes, other times photographing my windows with a telephoto lens like she was conducting surveillance for a covert operation. 3 weeks into this suburban Cold War, Gretchen apparently decided that clipboard tyranny was not enough. She escalated to what my lawyer would later call felony-level stupid. I came home from work on a Thursday evening to find my locks had been changed. A laminated notice was taped to the door that read premises sealed by Birch Hollow HOA due to non-compliance. Contact Gretchen Paley for re-entry terms. I stood there for a moment, genuinely impressed by the audacity. Then I called 911. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. Officer Martinez and Officer Chen took approximately 90 seconds to assess the situation and confirm what I already knew. The HOA was not even a legally registered entity. The neighborhood had attempted to form one 8 years ago but failed to properly ratify it. Gretchen had been cosplaying as president for life ever since, enforcing rules that had the legal weight of a child's lemonade stand. When the officers asked Gretchen how she had gotten into my house to change the locks, she smiled with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences and said, "Oh, I have the emergency keys. For safety. I had copies made when the previous owner lived here." Officer Martinez's expression shifted from professional patience to something I can only describe as cop mode. "Ma'am, are you saying you entered this man's house without permission and changed his locks?" Gretchen's smile faltered slightly. "Well, as HOA president, I have certain authorities." Officer Chen pulled out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, what you have is the right to remain silent." Watching Gretchen get arrested on my own front lawn while 6 visor-wearing women stood frozen in horror was probably the highlight of my year. She was bailed out 3 hours later by her confused husband, who apparently thought she had been at bunco night, but the damage to her reputation had begun. I decided to go nuclear. If Gretchen wanted a war, I would give her scorched earth. First, I contacted the county and filed a formal complaint about the illegal HOA operations. Then I compiled all my security footage into a greatest hits reel of Gretchen's trespassing and sent it to a local investigative reporter who had been looking for a story about HOA overreach. Within 48 hours, a news van was parked in front of Gretchen's house just in time to catch her screaming at a building inspector who was measuring her apparently illegal pergola. The inspector was trying to explain that the structure violated county codes, but Gretchen was too busy calling him a communist to listen. The news segment that aired that night was titled "Which of Birch Hollow Rogue HOA President Faces Trespassing Charges? Shady History Uncovered." They had done their homework. Not only had Gretchen been illegally collecting HOA fees for nearly a decade, she had been using the money for personal projects including a koi pond, a quote patriotic flag platform unquote, and mysteriously, multiple trips to Vegas that she claimed were for HOA conferences that did not exist. The neighbors started abandoning ship faster than rats on the Titanic. Within a week, every single board member had resigned, citing sudden clarity about the legal implications of fraud. The fake HOA dissolved overnight, leaving Gretchen standing alone with her laminated binders and nowhere to wield them. The district attorney's office, motivated by the media attention and what they called a clear pattern of fraudulent behavior, filed charges. Gretchen had collected approximately $14,000 in illegal fines over the years, money she had used for personal expenses while claiming it was for neighborhood improvements that never materialized. The judge was not amused. Gretchen was found guilty of fraud, trespassing, and harassment. She was ordered to pay full restitution to all affected neighbors plus penalties, bringing the total to $22,000. To pay it, she was forced to sell her beloved minivan with the HOA president custom license plate and host a humiliating garage sale where she had to watch neighbors she had tormented for years pick through her belongings. I attended the garage sale out of pure spite and bought her entire collection of visors for $5. I donated them to a local community theater that was doing a production about suburban dysfunction. But the crown jewel of consequences came when the county condemned her illegal pergola. I set up a lawn chair and watched with a cold beer as a bulldozer reduced it to splinters while Gretchen sobbed and shouted about constitutional rights she did not actually have. Her husband stood beside her, finally understanding why his wife had been coming home from bunco night with court documents. The criminal charges resulted in 6 months of house arrest and 3 years of probation. The judge specifically banned her from holding any position of authority in any neighborhood organization, forever. When the sentence was read, Gretchen's face went through every shade of red before settling on a purple that matched her illegal pergola's former paint job. She opened her mouth to object, but her lawyer grabbed her arm and shook his head with the exhausted expression of someone who had been fighting a losing battle against his client's ego. The gavel came down with a decisive bang. Gretchen let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a shriek as the bailiff explained she would need to report to her probation officer within 48 hours.